When I met him, it felt like the universe had finally aligned in my favor. He wasn't just charming. He was thoughtful, kind, and had an air of confidence that made me feel safe. Our first few months together were a whirlwind of romance. Spontaneous getaways, late-night conversations about our dreams, and a sense of partnership that made me believe I had found my forever. We met at a friend's dinner party, an intimate gathering where the hum of laughter filled the air. I noticed him immediately, standing near the bookshelf, thumbing through a novel as if the chaos around him didn't exist. When our eyes met, he smiled, a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "Interesting choice," I said, nodding toward the book he was holding. He glanced at the cover, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. "I'll admit I judged it by its cover," he replied. "But maybe you can recommend something better?" From that moment we were inseparable. His love for literature matched mine, and we often found ourselves spending lazy Sundays in cozy bookstores, debating the merits of different genres. He introduced me to authors I'd never heard of, and I, in turn, showed him my favorite poets. "I think I've found my soulmate," I once joked after a particularly long discussion about a novel we both loved. "I hope so," he said, his tone serious. "Because I've already found mine." Our relationship felt like a story straight out of one of the books we both adored. He was attentive in ways that made me feel cherished, remembering my coffee order without asking, leaving notes in the margins of books he thought I'd enjoy, and always knowing when I needed a quiet moment or a comforting hug. When he proposed a year later, it was perfect in its simplicity. We were walking along the beach at sunset, the waves crashing softly against the shore. He stopped, pulling me close, and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, just close friends and family. I remember the way he looked at me as I walked down the aisle, his eyes brimming with tears and love. In that moment I thought I had everything I could ever want. After the ceremony, as we danced under a canopy of stars, he whispered, "This is the beginning of our forever." "I can't wait," I replied, resting my head on his shoulder. The early years of our marriage were filled with joy and contentment. We moved into a charming little house with a garden in the back where I planted flowers, and he built a small reading nook by the window. It was our sanctuary, a place that felt like home in every sense of the word. We talked endlessly about our future, dreaming about traveling to far-off places, raising a family, and growing old together. "We'll be one of those couples that people envy," he said one night, his arms wrapped around me as we lay on the couch. I believed him. I believed in us. He had a way of making me feel like the luckiest woman in the world. When he held my hand, it was as if nothing else mattered. But looking back now, I wonder if I was too caught up in the dream. Maybe I ignored the little signs, the subtle moments when his smile didn't quite reach his eyes or when his mind seemed miles away even as he sat beside me. Still, I clung to the belief that we were happy, that our love was unshakable. I couldn't have known then that cracks were forming beneath the surface, cracks that would one day shatter the foundation of everything I held dear. If you'd asked me then, I would have said my life was perfect. But perfection, as I would soon learn, can be a fragile illusion. At first, the changes were so subtle that I barely noticed them. A missed dinner here, a vague excuse there, nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. But over time, the distance between us grew, like a faint crack in a mirror spreading until the reflection was warped. I told myself he was just busy. His career had taken off in ways we hadn't anticipated, and his late nights at the office were, in his words, a necessary sacrifice for the life we were building. "It's all for us," he'd say, kissing my forehead as he left for yet another late meeting. I wanted to believe him. After all, wasn't this the same man who had once driven across town in the middle of the night to bring me soup when I was sick? The man who had spent hours helping me plant tulips in the garden just because he knew how much I loved them? But there were moments that gave me pause. The way he'd glance at his phone, quickly tucking it away when I entered the room. The way his answers to my questions grew shorter, more clipped. "Who was that on the phone?" I asked one evening as we sat down to dinner. "Just work," he replied, not meeting my eyes. Work had become the default answer, a convenient shield that kept me from pressing further. I began to feel a nagging sense of unease, like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. It wasn't just his behavior. It was the way he seemed to be pulling away piece by piece until the man I knew felt like a stranger. One night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was I imagining things? Was I being overly sensitive? I didn't want to be the kind of wife who doubted her husband, who let insecurity cloud her judgment. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Our conversations became strained, punctuated by long silences that neither of us seemed willing to break. I'd ask about his day and his responses were curt, as if he couldn't be bothered to engage. "You're distracted," I said one evening as we sat on the couch. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm just tired, okay? Work has been crazy." I nodded, biting back the urge to ask more. Pushing him seemed to only make him retreat further, and I was desperate to keep the peace. Then there were the absences, long stretches of time when I didn't know where he was or what he was doing. "I have a client dinner," he'd say, grabbing his coat as he headed out the door. "What time will you be back?" "Late." "Don't wait up." I'd watch him leave, my chest tightening with a mix of worry and frustration. I tried to convince myself that this was normal, that all marriages went through phases of disconnect. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. One evening I confided in Clara, my best friend and the person who had always been my rock. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, tears brimming in my eyes. "He's pulling away and I don't know how to reach him." Clara placed a comforting hand on mine. "Have you talked to him about how you're feeling?" "I've tried," I said, my voice trembling. "But he just brushes it off. It's like he doesn't even see me anymore." Clara's expression softened. "Maybe it's time to stop giving him the benefit of the doubt," she said gently. "Sometimes we ignore the signs because we don't want to face the truth." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was I ignoring the signs? Was I so desperate to hold on to the life we'd built that I was blind to the cracks forming beneath my feet? The turning point came one evening when I found myself alone in the house, his absence once again explained by a vague work emergency. I wandered through the rooms, the silence oppressive. I paused in the living room, my gaze falling on the bookshelf where we'd spent countless hours debating our favorite authors. The memories felt like a distant echo, a reminder of what we once had. Reaching out, I pulled one of his books from the shelf, flipping through the pages absent-mindedly. That's when I found it, a photo tucked between the pages. The image was old, slightly faded, but the faces were unmistakable. He was standing beside a woman I didn't recognize, his arm wrapped around her shoulder. In front of them was a small child, a boy with his eyes and his smile. My heart sank as I stared at the picture, the weight of realization crashing down on me. Who were they? And why had he never mentioned them? I sat down, clutching the photo, my mind racing with questions. This wasn't just a crack in our relationship. It was a chasm, one I wasn't sure we could bridge. The photo burned in my hands like a piece of evidence in a crime I hadn't yet solved. I couldn't stop staring at it, at the way his arm rested so casually around her, at the way the little boy beamed up at him. My thoughts churned with questions that had no answers, each one more painful than the last. Who were they? How long had this secret been buried? And most importantly, why hadn't he told me? My heart raced as I debated my next move. Part of me wanted to confront him the moment he walked through the door to demand answers. But another part, the part that feared the truth, held me back. That night I couldn't sleep. The photo sat on the nightstand like a ghost, its presence haunting me. When he finally came home well past midnight, I feigned sleep, too overwhelmed to face him. The next morning I resolved to dig deeper. I started by searching the house for anything that might explain the photo. Drawers, shelves, and boxes that had once been ignored now became my focus. It wasn't long before I found more. A shoebox tucked away in the back of his closet contained letters, photos, and small mementos. They all painted a picture of a life I knew nothing about. A life that included the woman and child from the photo. My heart ached as I flipped through the letters, each one more revealing than the last. They spoke of love, of plans for a future, and of heartbreak when things fell apart. The dates indicated that this relationship had ended years before we met, but the fact that he had kept these things, hidden them, felt like a betrayal in itself. Why hadn't he trusted me with this part of his past? Was it shame? Fear? Or something else entirely? I couldn't keep the discovery to myself any longer. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I placed the photo in front of him without saying a word. His reaction was immediate. His face paled, his fork clattering onto his plate. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In your book," I replied, my tone steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Who are they?" He hesitated, his eyes darting away from mine. It's not what you think, he said finally, his voice trembling. Then explain it to me, I demanded, my frustration bubbling to the surface. Because right now it looks like you've been keeping a major part of your life hidden from me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The woman is my ex, he admitted. And the boy, he's my son. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Your son? I repeated, my voice cracking. I didn't know how to tell you, he said, his tone defensive. It was years ago before I met you. I thought it didn't matter anymore. Didn't matter? I asked, my anger rising. How can you say that? He's your child. The argument that followed was one of the worst we'd ever had. I accused him of lying, of withholding a truth that I had every right to know. He countered by saying that he was trying to protect me, that he hadn't wanted to complicate our lives with his past. But his excuses rang hollow. The trust one had in him, the foundation of our relationship, felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. That night I slept in the guest room, unable to face him. The photo and the box of mementos sat on the nightstand, a painful reminder of the secrets he had kept. In the days that followed, the tension between us was unbearable. I wanted answers. Why he had hidden this, what it meant for our future. But every conversation ended in frustration. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said one evening, his voice heavy with guilt. But you did, I replied, my voice trembling. And I don't know if I can forgive you for this. The discovery of his son had opened a Pandora's box of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal. I couldn't stop thinking about the little boy in the photo, about what his life must be like, and about the father who had chosen to keep him a secret. And yet, despite my anger, a part of me still loved him. I wanted to understand, to find a way forward, but I didn't know if that was possible. After his confession, I found myself in a state of constant turmoil. Every glance at him felt like staring at a stranger, every memory of our time together tainted by the secrets he had kept. I needed answers, not just for my peace of mind but to determine if there was anything left to salvage in our relationship. I decided to piece together the story myself. If he wouldn't willingly give me the full truth, I would find it. Late one night, when he had fallen asleep on the couch, I retrieved the box of mementos I had found earlier. My hands trembled as I sifted through its contents, searching for something, anything, that could give me clarity. The letters were my starting point. They told a fragmented story of a relationship that seemed intense and passionate but ultimately fell apart. Her name was Emily, and based on the dates, their son must have been born shortly before their breakup. I found a copy of a birth certificate tucked beneath the stack of letters. It listed him as the father, a fact that made my stomach churn. This wasn't just a fleeting relationship. This was a chapter of his life that had fundamentally shaped who he was, and he had kept it hidden from me. I couldn't stop the questions that swirled in my mind. Did he still have contact with his son? Did he still speak to Emily? And if so, what did that mean for us? The next morning I confronted him again. This time I was armed with evidence and a determination to get the answers I deserved. You need to tell me everything, I said, placing the birth certificate and letters in front of him. No more half-truths. I need to know what really happened. He sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his secrets was finally too much to bear. Fine, he said quietly. I'll tell you everything. He explained that he and Emily had been together for several years, a relationship that started out strong but crumbled under the pressures of their differences. They had been young and impulsive, and when she got pregnant, they tried to make it work for the sake of their child. But the cracks in their relationship only deepened, and eventually they decided to go their separate ways. She was the one who ended it, he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. She said it was better for everyone if we went our own ways. I didn't fight her. I thought it was the right thing to do at the time. And your son? I asked, my voice trembling. What happened to him? He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. I stayed involved at first, he admitted. But as time went on, Emily made it harder for me to see him. She moved to another city, started a new life, and I let it happen. I told myself it was better for him to have a stable home, even if I wasn't in it. His words stung, not just because of what they revealed about his past, but because of what they implied about his character. He had given up on his son just as he had given up on telling me the truth. So you just walked away? I asked, my voice rising. You let her take him and you didn't even fight for him? I didn't want to fight, he said, his tone defensive. I thought it was the best thing for everyone. And then I met you and I wanted to leave all of that behind. I didn't think it would ever come up. Of course it came up. I snapped. You can't just erase your past. And you definitely can't keep something like this from me. The argument escalated, our voices echoing through the house. I accused him of being selfish, of prioritizing his comfort over his son's needs, and over my right to know the truth. He countered by saying that he had been trying to protect me, that he didn't want his past to interfere with our future. But his excuses felt hollow, his attempts at justification doing little to ease my anger. For days we barely spoke. The tension in the house was suffocating and I found myself retreating more and more, spending long hours at work or with Clara just to avoid him. Clara, as always, was a voice of reason. You're allowed to be angry, she said one evening as we sipped wine in her living room. But you also need to decide what you want. Is this something you can move past or is it a deal breaker? I don't know, I admitted, tears brimming in my eyes. I love him but it's so much. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the issue wasn't just about his son, it was about trust. He had broken mine in a way that felt almost irreparable. One evening, as we sat on opposite sides of the living room, I finally broke the silence. I need time, I said quietly. Time to figure out if I can forgive you. He nodded, his expression pained. I understand, he said. Take all the time you need. Just know that I love you and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. But could anything he did truly make up for the lies, the omissions, the betrayal? I didn't have the answers yet. All I knew was that the life we had built felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be rebuilt. Even though he had confessed everything, the weight of his betrayal still pressed heavily on my chest. Each time I thought about the little boy in the photograph, his son hidden from me for so long, my heart broke a little more. I needed time to process, but it felt like every moment only brought more questions and deeper hurt. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, my thoughts swirling, Clara called to check on me. How are you holding up? She asked, her voice gentle. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I knew him, Clara. I thought I knew everything about our life together. But now, I don't even know who I'm married to. Her silence on the other end of the line was heavy, filled with unspoken understanding. You don't have to decide anything right now, she said. Give yourself time to figure out what you want. I took her advice, spending the next few days focusing on myself. I went for long walks, journaled my thoughts, and even started therapy to help sort through the mess of emotions I was feeling. My therapist, a calm and compassionate woman named Diane, helped me unpack the layers of betrayal and confusion. It's not just about the secret, I told her during one session. It's about the fact that he didn't trust me enough to tell me. How do you rebuild trust after something like that? It's not easy, Diane replied. But the first step is deciding whether you want to try. Meanwhile, he was doing his best to make amends. He left me notes apologizing for his mistakes, cooked dinner without being asked, and tried to give me space while also showing that he cared. I know I messed up, he said one evening as we sat at opposite ends of the couch. But I love you and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed, I replied, my voice trembling. He nodded, his expression pained. I understand. But I'm not giving up on us. One night, as I was going through the box of mementos again, I came across a letter I hadn't noticed before. It was addressed to him from Emily. The date on the envelope was recent. Far more recent than I had expected. My heart pounded as I opened the letter and began to read. The words were a mix of apology and desperation. Emily wrote about their son, about how he missed his father and wanted to reconnect. She mentioned that she had reached out several times but had received no response. The implications of the letter were staggering. Not only had he hidden his son from me, but he had also ignored opportunities to be part of the boy's life. I couldn't understand it. How could he turn his back on his own child? When I confronted him with the letter, his reaction was a mix of guilt and defensiveness. I didn't know how to respond, he admitted, his voice breaking. I was scared. I didn't want to open that door and risk losing you. But you've already lost my trust, I said, tears streaming down my face. You had a chance to do the right thing and you chose to run from it. I know, he said, his voice filled with regret. And I hate myself for it. But it's not too late, I can fix this. I want to fix this. His words hung in the air, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were just that, words. Actions I thought were what mattered now. I told him he needed to reach out to Emily and his son. If you're serious about making things right, I said, you need to start by being a father to him. He nodded, his expression determined. I will, he promised. In the days that followed, he made good on his word. He contacted Emily and arranged to meet with his son. I didn't join him, I wasn't ready for that, but he kept me updated on how things went. It was hard, he said after their first meeting. He was so shy at first, but then he started opening up. He's such a great kid and I can't believe I've missed so much of his life. His words brought a mix of emotions. I was glad he was stepping up, but it also highlighted just how much he had taken for granted. As he began to rebuild his relationship with his son, I found myself questioning what it meant for our marriage. Could I forgive him for the lies? Could I move past the betrayal and trust him again? The answers didn't come easily, and I knew the road ahead would be long and complicated. The truth about his son had shaken our marriage to its core, but the aftermath of his confession felt even more unbearable. While he worked to rebuild his relationship with his son, I was left grappling with the magnitude of his betrayal. Each passing day felt like a reminder of the lies he had told and the trust he had broken. I couldn't shake the images from my mind. The photo of him with his ex and their son, the letters Emily had written pleading for him to reconnect, and the look of guilt on his face when he finally admitted the truth. They played on a loop in my head, haunting me day and night. Do you even understand what you've done to me? I asked him one evening, my voice trembling with emotion. I do, he replied quietly. And I hate myself for it. I was selfish and I hurt you in ways I never wanted to. But I love you and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. His words rang hollow to me. Love, I thought bitterly, wasn't supposed to feel like this. Like betrayal, like heartbreak, like the ground beneath my feet had crumbled away. I began to withdraw from him, retreating into myself as I tried to process everything. Work became my refuge, a place where I could distract myself from the chaos at home. Even Clara, my ever-supportive best friend, couldn't seem to find the right words to comfort me. You're allowed to feel angry, Em, she said one evening over wine. You're allowed to feel whatever you need to feel. But anger wasn't the only emotion I felt. Beneath the rage was a deep, aching sadness. Sadness for the life I thought we had, for the man I thought I knew, and for the trust that now felt irreparably broken. I cried more in those weeks than I ever had before. Silent tears in the middle of the night when he was asleep, gut-wrenching sobs in the shower where no one could hear me. The pain was all-consuming, like a weight pressing down on my chest that I couldn't seem to shake. One day, as I sat alone in the park watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand, I realized just how lost I felt. I didn't know who I was anymore outside of my identity as his wife. Everything I had built my life around now felt like a lie. It was Clara who finally pushed me to take action. You need to decide what's best for you, she said firmly. Not for him, not for anyone else, just for you. That night, I packed a bag and left a note on the kitchen counter. I needed space, I wrote. Time to figure out what I wanted, away from the constant reminders of his betrayal. When he came home and found the note, he called me immediately. Please don't do this, he said, his voice cracking. I need you. We can get through this together. I need time, I replied, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. I can't keep pretending everything's okay. I stayed with Clara for the next few weeks, finding solace in her unwavering support. She let me cry, vent, and sit in silence when words felt too heavy. Slowly I began to feel the fog lift, the weight on my chest easing ever so slightly. I spent those weeks rediscovering myself, doing the things I loved, reconnecting with old friends and taking long walks to clear my mind. For the first time in years, I was focusing solely on me. Meanwhile, he continued to reach out, sending messages and leaving voicemails. Some were filled with apologies, others with pleas for me to come home. I know I hurt you, one message said. But I can't imagine my life without you. Please, just give me a chance to prove that I can be better. But the thought of going back felt overwhelming. How could I return to a marriage where the foundation of trust had been shattered? As the weeks turned into months, I began to find a sense of clarity. I realized that while I still loved him, I couldn't continue to sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of our relationship. I deserved honesty, respect, and a partner who valued me enough to share the whole truth. When I finally returned home, it wasn't to reconcile. It was to have an honest conversation about where we stood. I can't keep doing this, I told him, my voice steady. I love you, but I can't forgive you. Not yet, and maybe not ever. His face fell, and for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. I don't blame you, he said quietly. But I'm not giving up on us. The heartbreak of that conversation lingered, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of agency over my own life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it, on my own terms. The days after our conversation felt like stepping into uncharted territory. While I had decided not to return to the marriage, not yet at least, I also knew I couldn't let his betrayal define the rest of my life. It was time to rediscover who I was, to reclaim the parts of myself I had lost in the process of being his wife. I started small. The first thing I did was rearrange the house, moving furniture and redecorating spaces to make them feel more like my own. The act of change, however minor, gave me a sense of control in a world that had felt chaotic and unpredictable. I also threw myself into work, taking on projects that challenged and excited me. My colleagues noticed the change almost immediately. "You're glowing," one of them remarked during a meeting. "Am I?" I replied, surprised by the comment. But as I thought about it, I realized that I did feel lighter, freer, more focused. Outside of work, I began reconnecting with old friends and hobbies I had long neglected. I took up painting again, spending hours in my studio lost in colors and textures. It was therapeutic, a way to channel my emotions into something tangible and beautiful. Clara was a constant presence during this time, encouraging me to step outside of my comfort zone. "You should try yoga," she suggested one afternoon. "It's great for clearing your mind." "I don't know," I said hesitantly. "I've never been good at stuff like that." "Come on," she insisted. "What's the worst that could happen?" Reluctantly, I agreed, and to my surprise, I found myself enjoying the classes. There was something meditative about the practice, a sense of grounding that I hadn't felt in a long time. "You're stronger than you think," the instructor said during one session, her words resonating deeply with me. Strong. It wasn't a word I had used to describe myself in recent months, but slowly I was beginning to believe it again. As I regained my confidence, I also began to explore what I wanted for my future. For so long, my life had been tied to him and our shared dreams, but now I was realizing the importance of having my own aspirations. I created a vision board, filling it with images of places I wanted to visit, skills I wanted to learn, and goals I hoped to achieve. Travel topped the list, and I started planning a solo trip, a chance to see the world on my terms. At the same time, I began therapy again, this time with a focus on rebuilding my sense of self-worth. Diane, my therapist, helped me unpack the feelings of inadequacy and betrayal that still lingered. "You've been through a lot," she said during one session. "But you've also shown incredible resilience. This is your time to focus on what makes you happy." Her words became a mantra for me, a reminder that my happiness didn't have to be tied to anyone else. Meanwhile, he continued to reach out, his messages a mix of apologies and updates about his son. "I know you need space," one message read. "But I want you to know that I'm working on myself too. I've started therapy and I'm doing everything I can to be a better person. For you, for our future." I appreciated his efforts, but I knew that his journey was separate from mine. I needed to heal on my own terms before I could even consider rebuilding what we had lost. One day, as I was walking through the park, I saw a father playing with his son. The sight brought a pang of sadness but also a sense of clarity. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to move forward. I could choose to let go of the anger and focus on building a life that brought me joy and fulfillment. I began volunteering at a local community center, working with children and families who were going through difficult times. The experience was both humbling and empowering, reminding me of the strength and resilience that people are capable of. "You're amazing with them," the program coordinator said one afternoon. "You have a way of making people feel seen." Her words stayed with me, a testament to the person I was becoming. A person who had been through pain but refused to let it define her. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about the future. It wasn't perfect and there were still moments of doubt and sadness, but I was learning to embrace the uncertainty. I didn't know what would happen with him, whether we could find a way back to each other or if our paths would continue to diverge. But I did know one thing. I was stronger than I had ever realized, and I was ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself at a crossroads. My life had started to take on a new rhythm, one defined by self-discovery and independence. But his presence lingered, not just in my memories but in the messages he continued to send and the efforts he made to stay connected. "I miss you," one of his texts read. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you'll give me a chance to earn it." His words tugged at my heart, a painful reminder of the love we had shared and the life we had built together. But they also stirred something else: anger, hurt, and the question that haunted me: could I ever truly forgive him? Clara, ever the voice of reason, encouraged me to take my time. Forgiveness isn't about him, she said one evening as we sat on her porch. It's about you. It's about letting go of the pain so you can move forward, whether that's with him or without him. Her words resonated, but the idea of forgiveness felt daunting. How could I let go of the betrayal that had upended my life? How could I trust him again after everything he had hidden from me? Diane, my therapist, helped me explore these questions. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, she said during one session. It means choosing not to let the hurt control you. It's a process, and it's okay if you're not ready yet. I spent hours journaling, trying to make sense of my feelings. On one hand, I still loved him, his smile, his laugh, the way he used to make me feel safe and cherished. But on the other hand, the pain of his deception felt like an insurmountable barrier. One evening he showed up at my door unannounced. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to face him. But when I saw him standing there, his shoulders slumped and his eyes filled with regret, I knew I couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat on the couch, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. "I know I've hurt you," he began, his voice trembling. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know how much I regret what I've done. Not just hiding my son, but everything, the lies, the betrayal, all of it." His vulnerability caught me off guard. For the first time I saw the depth of his remorse, the weight of the guilt he carried. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I want to, but I don't know if I can." He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand," he said. "But I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be better, that I can make things right." His words hung in the air, and I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope that I couldn't quite extinguish. I told him I needed more time, that I couldn't make any promises. "I'm working on myself right now," I said. "I can't focus on us until I figure out what I need." "I'll wait as long as it takes," he said, his voice steady. His promise was both comforting and overwhelming. Part of me wanted to believe in his sincerity, but another part was terrified of opening myself up to more pain. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice his efforts. He started attending therapy, something he had resisted for years. He spent time with his son, rebuilding a relationship that had once been fractured. And he made a point of showing me that he was committed to change, not through grand gestures but through small, consistent actions. One evening, Claire and I talked about it over dinner. "Do you think people can really change?" I asked her. "I think they can," she said thoughtfully. "But only if they're willing to do the work. And it sounds like he is." Her words gave me hope, but I knew that forgiveness was something I had to find within myself. It wasn't just about him. It was about reclaiming my peace, letting go of the anger that had been eating away at me. I began to open myself up to the possibility of forgiveness, taking small steps toward healing. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain felt as fresh as the moment I had discovered his lies. But slowly I started to feel the weight lifting, replaced by a sense of clarity and strength. My emotions began to shift. The anger that had once consumed me started to give way to something softer, something closer to acceptance. But forgiveness still felt like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. To truly move forward, I needed to see the situation from a new perspective, one that wasn't clouded by pain and resentment. It began with an unexpected invitation. One afternoon, I received a call from his ex, Emily. Her voice was hesitant, cautious, but sincere. "I know this is strange," she said, "but I'd like to meet with you. I think we should talk." I was taken aback. Of all the people I expected to hear from, she was the last. My first instinct was to say no, but something in her voice made me pause. Perhaps she had answers I needed, or perhaps, like me, she was searching for closure. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where you could speak freely without fear of being overheard. She was waiting when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure if you would." "Neither was I admitted, my tone guarded. She offered a small smile. "I just thought it was time we talked. I know this situation has been complicated." For the next hour we spoke openly, about her relationship with him, about their son, and about the choices they had made. She didn't shy away from the mistakes they had both made, but she also offered insights I hadn't considered. He wasn't perfect, she said, her voice steady. But he tried. When things fell apart between us, it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because we were both too young and too stubborn to make it work. Her words painted a picture of a man who had struggled with his own flaws, a man who had made mistakes but wasn't inherently malicious. I asked her about their son, about what kind of relationship they had now. Her expression softened as she spoke about him. He's a good kid, she said. Smart, kind, and so much like his father in some ways. I think he's happy that they're reconnecting. It's been good for both of them. Hearing her talk about their son brought a mix of emotions. Jealousy, sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. At least now I had a clearer picture of the child who had been at the center of so much turmoil. When I left the cafe that afternoon, I felt lighter somehow. The conversation hadn't erased the pain, but it had given me a better understanding of the situation. Emily wasn't the villain I had built her up to be in my mind, and he wasn't as irredeemable as I had believed. That night I called Clara to share what had happened. "Do you think this changes anything?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it helps. It makes everything feel less black and white." With this new perspective, I started to see him in a different light. I noticed the small changes he had been making, the way he prioritized his son, the effort he put into therapy, and the patience he showed with me. One evening, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, I spoke up. "I see the work you're doing," I said quietly. "And I appreciate it." He looked at me, surprised but grateful. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness, but it was a step forward. Slowly, I began to let him back into my life. Not as my husband, but as someone who was trying to earn back my trust. We started having deeper conversations, ones that didn't shy away from the pain we had both experienced. He opened up about his regrets, his fears, and the lessons he had learned. "I was so scared of losing you," he admitted one night. "But in trying to protect myself, I hurt you more than I ever thought possible." His honesty was disarming, and for the first time I felt like we were on the same page. He wasn't trying to excuse his actions. He was taking responsibility for them. The process wasn't easy. There were moments when old wounds reopened, when the weight of the past felt too heavy to bear. But each time we worked through it, together. Through it all, I began to realize that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of the pain. It was about giving myself permission to heal, to move forward without being tethered to the anger and betrayal that had once consumed me. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Not just about us, but about myself and the life I was building. The journey toward reclaiming my life wasn't linear. There were days when I felt empowered, ready to take on the world, and days when the weight of betrayal threatened to pull me back into the darkness. But with each passing moment, I learned to stand taller, to own my story, and to find strength in the person I was becoming. One of the first steps in reclaiming my power was redefining my sense of purpose. For so long, I had been consumed by my role as his wife, molding my identity around our shared dreams and the life we had built together. Now I realized I needed to focus on what truly mattered to me. I began to set new goals, both big and small. I signed up for a writing workshop, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. I started volunteering at a local shelter, finding fulfillment in helping others who were going through tough times. Each new experience added a layer of confidence and self-assurance. "I feel like I'm seeing the old you again," Clara said one evening over dinner. "The old me?" I asked with a laugh. "The you who isn't afraid to go after what she wants," she clarified. "It's inspiring." Her words stayed with me, a reminder of how far I had come. While I worked on rebuilding myself, he continued to show up in small but meaningful ways. He didn't push me to make decisions about our relationship, but instead focused on proving that he had changed. He spent more time with his son, becoming the father he had always wanted to be. One evening he showed me a drawing his son had made, a picture of the two of them at the park holding hands. "He's amazing," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You're building something important with him," I replied, genuinely happy for them. Our interactions became less tense, more honest. We started having dinner together occasionally, conversations flowing more naturally than they had in months. It felt like we were building a new foundation, one based on mutual respect and understanding. So I kept my guard up. Forgiveness was one thing, but rebuilding trust was another. I needed to be sure that the changes he was making were real and lasting. My therapist, Diane, helped me navigate these feelings. Trust is earned over time, she said. It's okay to take things slow. What matters is that you're listening to yourself and honoring your boundaries. Her advice gave me the clarity I needed. I wasn't ready to jump back into our marriage, but I was open to exploring what a future together might look like. Meanwhile, my newfound independence continued to flourish. I traveled to a nearby city for a weekend getaway, exploring art galleries, cozy cafes, and scenic parks. The experience was liberating, a reminder that I could create joy and adventure on my own terms. I also began sharing my writing with others, submitting short stories to local publications and receiving positive feedback. The sense of accomplishment was exhilarating, a testament to the strength I had found within myself. During one particularly introspective evening, I wrote a letter to my past self. You're stronger than you think, I wrote. You've been through heartache, betrayal, and loss, but you've also found resilience, courage, and love for yourself, for the life you're building, and for the possibilities that lie ahead. The act of writing the letter felt like a release, a way to honor my journey and the growth I had experienced. He continued to reach out, his messages becoming less about apologies and more about gratitude. Thank you for giving me the space to grow, one text read. I've learned so much about myself, about what it means to truly love someone. Whether or not we end up together, I'm a better person because of you. His words were genuine, and for the first time I believed them. As I looked at the life I was creating, I realized that I didn't need him to feel whole. I had found strength and fulfillment within myself, and that was enough. But I also recognized that he had grown too, and the possibility of a future together didn't feel as daunting as it once had. As time went on, the heaviness that had once defined our relationship began to lift. While the scars of betrayal remained, they no longer felt like open wounds. I found myself at a crossroads, ready to decide whether to let go completely or to embrace the possibility of a new chapter with him. It was during a quiet evening at Clara's house that the clarity I had been searching for finally came. We were sitting on her porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset when she turned to me and asked, "What does your heart tell you?" I hesitated, unsure how to put my feelings into words. "It tells me that I've changed," I said finally. "That I'm not the same person I was before all of this." "And what about him?" she asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "He's changed too," I admitted. "But I don't know if it's enough." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying memories of our relationship, the good, the bad, and everything in between. I thought about the life we had built together and the life I had been creating on my own. The next morning I went for a walk in the park, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. As I wandered the paths, I found myself drawn to a small bench near the pond. Sitting there, I closed my eyes and let the sounds of nature wash over me. When I opened them, I knew what I needed to do. I called him later that day and asked if he could meet me at the park. He agreed immediately, his voice filled with both hope and apprehension. When he arrived, I noticed how different he looked. More grounded, more present. He sat beside me on the bench, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said finally, my voice steady. "About us, about everything that's happened." He nodded, his expression earnest. "I have too," he said. "And I know I've made mistakes that I can't undo. But I want you to know that I'm committed to being better, not just for you but for myself and for my son." "I can see that," I replied. "And I respect the work you've done. But this isn't just about you, it's about me too. About what I need and what I deserve." "You deserve everything," he said softly. "And I want to give that to you if you'll let me." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt the weight of the decision before me. I thought about the progress we had both made, about the love that still lingered between us despite everything. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were," I said. "But maybe we don't have to. Maybe we can create something new, something stronger, built on honesty and respect." He nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "I'd like that," he said. "More than anything." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, about our hopes, our fears, and the lessons we had learned. It felt like the first time in months that we were truly on the same page, working toward the same goal. "I know it won't be easy," I said. "But I'm willing to try as long as we both put in the effort." "I'll do whatever it takes," he promised. From that day forward, we approached our relationship with a renewed sense of purpose. We attended couples therapy to address the lingering issues and to learn how to communicate more effectively. We made time for each other, prioritizing our connection over the distractions of daily life. I also set boundaries, making it clear that my independence was non-negotiable. I need to keep doing the things that make me happy, I told him. Because I've learned that I can't pour from an empty cup. He agreed, encouraging me to pursue my passions and supporting me in ways he hadn't before. Our relationship wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. But it was real. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to growth. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, he took my hand and said, "Thank you for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I won't waste it." "You're earning it," I replied, squeezing his hand. One day at a time. The road to healing and rebuilding wasn't without its challenges, but it was worth it. Through hard conversations, shared experiences, and small but meaningful acts of trust, we found a way to create something new. A relationship built not on perfection but on mutual understanding and growth. Months turned into a year, and with each passing day, I found myself letting go of the pain that had once consumed me. The memories of his betrayal were still there, but they no longer held the same power over me. Instead, they served as a reminder of how far we had come and how much we had both grown. One evening, as we sat together in the garden, our favorite place to unwind after a long day, he turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. "I know I've said this before," he began, his voice steady, "but I want to thank you for giving me another chance. You've taught